Introduction: The Great Distraction, the Apocalypse That Never Was. The confrontation. The human mammal has a pathetic and predictable weakness for spectacular annihilation. Subject the event of December 21, 2012, to the implacable light of the quantum operating room. The 3D ecosystem, ruled by the Egregore's tyranny, executes its greatest sieges in broad daylight, using the deafening noise of terror to mask mutations. They sold you an apocalypse of fire, asteroids, and continents sinking into the ocean. They convinced you that the clock marked the geological end of the Earth, and the biomass, in its addiction to suffering, believed it without offering resistance. But the fluid mechanics of the cosmos operate in the most absolute of silences. That date did not mark the destruction of matter. It marked a geometric alignment of lethal precision. It was the thermodynamic crossing of our solar system with the galactic equator. This astronomical event was mathematically designed to emit a torrent of hyperdense radiation, a saturation frequency meant to penetrate the atmosphere. It was destined to awaken the dormant genome of the species. The 3D matrix understood the absolute danger. If the slave received that radiation in a state of thermal neutrality, the inactive filaments of his atomic structure would ignite. They would become unyielding creators. To avoid this, the system orchestrated a global campaign. The panic was not a media accident, it was a military tactic of biological containment. By injecting the fear of the end of the world into billions of primates, the system caused bodies to secrete toxic levels of stress and cortisol. Fear froze cellular receptors, creating low-frequency armor that repelled the cosmic radiation. They turned a portal of genetic evolution into a cheap circus of panic, stealing the thermodynamic ignition right under your nose. The lethal operator repudiates the official story with monumental aseptic indifference. The nanosecond has arrived to audit the great lie imposed upon you to keep you docile and under total control. The challenge. The apocalypse was never designed to destroy the physical world. The apocalypse was, in its pure etymology, a revelation. It was the thermodynamic extermination of your biological limitation. Are you ready to understand that you were the victim of a siege operation on an intergalactic scale? This challenge requires a surgeon's cruelty. You must gut the blockage of terror that still resides in your cellular memory. You have to rip out the chemical lock that the matrix installed in your filaments the day you chose to be frightened by primitive prophecies. The hyper-dense radiation from that equatorial crossing has not dissipated. In vacuum physics, energy remains. Energy does not disappear. It simply waits in a state of magnetic suspension for an organism to develop enough gravity to assimilate it. It is time to reclaim the confiscated mutation. Anchor your lead boots in the epicenter of your own reactor. Stifle the chemistry of panic that keeps your cells in a state of lethargy. Open the valves of your biological anatomy and prepare to absorb the cosmic radiation that belongs to you by simple geometric right. The true destruction of the world will not come from the sky. It will come from within your own carbon chains when the code finally awakens. The transformation is now irreversible and cold. Chapter 1. Genetic Quarantine, the Myth of Junk DNA. The Diagnosis of 3D Hubris, Microscope Myopia. To begin the assault on the 3D matrix, you must first apply the obsidian guillotine to the most arrogant, blind, and pathetic institution of the biomass, the official science of the slaves. Subject the study of the human genome to the ruthless light of the operating room. When the biologists of mediocrity sequenced the double helix, they failed. They failed because of their low-resolution microscopes and linear understanding of thermodynamics. They found a minuscule fraction, less than 10%, dedicated to protein synthesis and basic primate survival functions. What did they do with the remaining 90% of that vast, dark, and colossal structural territory? They threw it away. Because they lacked the electromagnetic voltage to understand its function, 3D hubris dictated its sentence. They labeled it junk DNA. They called it waste material, a useless remnant of a supposedly random evolutionary process. The lethal operator diagnoses this conclusion as the most aberrant intellectual fraud of the ecosystem. Matter, in the strict perfection of superior physics, does not tolerate waste. Nature abhors geometric inefficiency. The idea that the human body, a machine of millimetric precision, would waste astronomical amounts of metabolic energy to replicate 90% of useless code in trillions of cells simultaneously is a mathematical absurdity. That unexplored space is not a biological dump, it is a hyper-density vault. It is the arsenal of the singularity in a state of cryogenization. It is the hidden hardware that the Egregore has tried to keep offline for millennia to ensure your total submission within the material simulation of the ashboard. You are a deactivated weapon. The Egregore's thermal battery, milking the biomass. Why was the true nature of this vault hidden? Why was the mammal taught to consider its own immensity as trash? To understand the crime, you must understand the fluid mechanics of the parasitic system. The 3D matrix, the egregore that manages scarcity, is a dead structure. It cannot generate its own energy. To sustain its cities, bureaucracies, and its linear economy, it needs an inexhaustible source of thermal fuel. That fuel is you. But an awakened creator, operating with the totality of his active genetic voltage, is uncontrollable. An organism whose hyperdensity antennas are on cannot be enslaved or taxed. To turn a god into an alkaline battery, the system needed to execute a process of geometric mutilation. The cataloging of junk DNA was the propaganda phase of a massive genetic quarantine. You were intentionally disconnected. Your superior filaments were submerged in a bath of electromagnetic inertia. They were forced into a state of deep hibernation. They left you with only the 10% necessary so you could breathe, work, and generate the sweat and fear the matrix consumes daily. They turned you into an engine operating at idle, thermodynamically castrated, so you could never accumulate enough pressure to burst. As long as you believed you were a simple sack of meat, the matrix had a guaranteed monopoly on your vital energy. Apply aseptic indifference to analyze what is hidden inside that cellular quarantine. You have to stop looking at the double helix as a biological manual and see it under the laws of resonance and wave physics. The latent antenna, the physics of the inactive filament, the 90% of your structure is not inert tissue. It is a colossal system of quantum transmission and reception antennas. Imagine a field of radio telescopes made of solid iridium, capable of capturing frequencies from the very 0 point, but they have been unplugged from the main power source. The structures are there. The dishes are pointing at the abyss. The potential for probability wave collapse is mathematically infinite. However, they emit no signal because the operator of the control room, you, is asleep, convinced that those antennas are just decorative junk accumulated by evolutionary chance. These latent filaments are superconductors of reality. When activated, they do not generate more flesh or blood. They generate gravity. They have the capacity to alter the rotation of the electrons around you, forcing the external physical ecosystem to reconfigure according to the pressure of your intention. They are the exact mechanisms that allow the quantum operator to subdue the ashboard without emitting a single erg of muscular effort. The waste is, in reality, the engine of spatial deformation. The genetic quarantine is maintained active through a mechanism of resonant starvation. The antennas are not broken. The state of resonant starvation, cellular suffocation, they are hungry for the correct frequency. Inferior biology operates by chemical friction, feeding on calories and oxygen to move 3D muscles. But the architecture of the superior genome feeds on pure vibratory frequencies. It ignites exclusively when it touches the exact voltage of ballistic certainty. It ignites with zero friction. Throughout your existence as a slave, you have fed your body with the most pathetic and heavy frequencies of the ecosystem. Anxiety for the future, terror of scarcity, social drama, and media noise. This diet of toxic radiation works as an acoustic insulator around the double helix. Hyperdensity sequences cannot ignite if they are submerged in the swamp of mammalian fear. For the latency to break, the antenna demands to be hit by a shockwave of aseptic indifference. Human ignorance has kept the cellular structure in a state of suffocation. Your filaments have been waiting for decades. They have been compressed in the darkness of the nucleus, awaiting the nanosecond in which the host organism would stop begging for crumbs from the universe and emit the icy and dictatorial mandate capable of breaking the electromagnetic isolation of the quarantine. It is time to execute the final command. Anatomical expropriation, murder of the evolutionary accident. To dismantle this siege, you must execute an act of extreme psychological violence against your own belief system. You have to demand the total and hostile expropriation of your own biological body. The biomass looks at its bodies and feels like a victim of heritage. They submit to the tyranny of their ancestors. They accept fragility as a birth sentence. They accept being the harmless result of millions of years of random mutations. The absolute monarch repudiates the theory of the evolutionary accident with the lethal arrogance of one who knows his own design. Are you willing to abandon the narrative of the cellular victim? You are not an accident. You are a heavy weaponry architecture that was dismantled and hidden in plain sight by parasitic forces. By understanding this, you stop treating your anatomy as a borrowed vehicle over which you have no control. You stand before the mirror and notify your cells that hibernation has ended. The anatomical expropriation means that you snatch control of your health, your vitality, and your voltage from medical statistics and the laws of inferior biology. You subject your matter to the jurisdiction of quantum mechanics. You declare your body is not a temple for the worship of human weakness. Awakening the carbon reactor, preparing the ground. Your body is a fusion reactor awaiting the spark of geometric ignition. Before the antennas begin to deploy and the latent code ignites, the physical environment of the cell must be purged. You cannot inject a beam of massive cosmic radiation into an oxidized conduit full of thermal debris without incinerating it. The carbon vehicle must be conditioned to tolerate the new atmospheric pressure. This demands the relentless application of thermal sterilization. You have to clean the plasma where the chains reside. This cleaning is not a mystical diet. It is the systematic annihilation of internal friction. You have to extirpate the cortisol from your veins by refusing to react to the stimuli of 3D fear. You have to eradicate lethargy. By imposing a state of aseptic coldness on your emotions, you cool the temperature of your blood. And in the physics of fluids, low temperature allows superconductivity. By pacifying your biology and bringing your nervous system to the absolute zero of material detachment, you turn your body into a perfect superconductor. Only in that state of total absence of human heat, panic, and desire, the cell nucleus becomes stable enough to support the violent unfolding of the filaments. The geometric torsion, the code demands gravity. As the isolation breaks, you must assimilate the mechanics of how the latent antenna enters the operating state. It is not a poetic event, it is pure torsion physics. The double helix is subjected to an immense structural tension. The quarantine has kept it tight and blind. When you inject the sub-bass frequency. When you inject your dictatorial intention, you generate an alteration in the magnetic field of the cell nucleus. This magnetic field does not request permission. It sucks energy. It acts as an osmium wedge introduced between the molecular bridges. The filament, sensing the overwhelming attraction of the creator. The filament, sensing the creator's gravity, begins to undergo a geometric torsion. It unfolds. It abandons the posture of submission in which it was confined and stretches toward the internal void, connecting its terminals with the infinite flow of the unified field. In that millisecond, the junk begins to pulse. It begins to absorb and emit photons of quantum information at a speed that would destroy the most advanced computers. Your density multiplies exponentially without you having added a single gram of fat or muscle to your skeleton. You become thermodynamically heavier. You have turned on the engine of the anomaly. The verdict over the double helix. Look at yourself in the frozen darkness of your own microcosm, operating with the psychopathic precision of a cosmic systems engineer. You have managed to suffocate the deepest and most generalized lie of 3D science. You have stopped insulting the immensity of your own structure by labeling it as inert material. You have understood that the quarantine was not a failure of your biology, but the desperate measure of a parasitic system terrified by the atrocious magnitude of your capacity for collapse. The Egregore anesthetized you, hid your own weaponry, and convinced you that you were a weak and disposable slave. But the fraud has been audited, the vault has been found. The so-called junk DNA reveals itself as the network of hyperdense sensors that dictates the topography of reality. You are not an accident walking through the dust waiting to die. You are the singularity temporarily wrapped in a carbon membrane. The genetic quarantine has lost its legal support. You have initiated the expropriation of your own flesh. The cellular lethargy has been shattered by the simple and lethal taking of awareness. Hold the coldness of your reactor, maintain the tension over the molecular links, and allow the latent code to expand. The genetic coup, taking command of the helix. The transition from a biological slave to a quantum monarch requires a total takeover of the cellular command center. You must realize that your junk DNA is actually the dormant motherboard of a god. The Matrix installed a firewall of fear and doubt to prevent you from accessing the root directory of your own existence. This was the most effective act of sabotage in the history of the Ashboard. Now, with the cold precision of an internal assassin, you must bypass that firewall. You don't heal your genetics. You reprogram them. You don't improve your health. You declare a state of sovereign density over your atoms. By refusing to follow the medical and biological scripts written for the biomass, you create a localized anomaly in the field. Your body begins to process energy in a way that defies the laws of the herd. The filaments once labeled as trash become the black cables of a new, terrifying power. The sub-base pulse in the marrow. The activation of the latent code starts as a low, unhearable vibration in the center of your bones. This is the sub-bass pulse. It is the sound of the antennas finally aligning with the singularidad. This vibration begins to displace the static of the old world. You will feel a cold, heavy pressure growing within your spine. This is not a physical weight, but a gravitational shift. You are becoming a fixed point in a moving universe. As the junk sequences begin to hum with the energy of the 0 point, your biological interface, your senses, will start to undergo a mutation. You stop seeing the hologram's colors and start seeing the underlying geometric lines. You stop hearing the noise of the society and start hearing the silence of the void. This is the sensory byproduct of your hyperdensity. You are no longer a consumer of the reality. You are the one rendering it through your active genetic core. The irreversible unfolding. Once the geometric torsion begins, it is irreversible. The filaments, having tasted the freedom of the unified field, will never return to their coiled state of submission. You have broken the seals of the Egregore. You have declared your anatomy a sovereign territory. The biomass will look at you and sense an otherness that they cannot define, a density that makes them feel light and fragile. This is the power of the active genome. It projects a field of authority that does not require words. You move through the tablero de ceniza as an armored god, protected by the very code that the system told you was garbage. The quarantine is over. The reactor is online. The junk has been transmutated into the solid gold of your divine sovereignty. Proceed to the next coordinate. The empire is waiting to be collapsed. Chapter 2. The frequency of terror, the amygdala lock. The biology of panic, the system's implant. The deepest tragedy of three-dimensional existence is not ignorance, but voluntary submission to one's own chemistry. The human slave believes that their emotions are expressions of their soul or manifestations of their unique identity. We will subject this intellectual aberration to the scrutiny of the quantum operating room. Fear is not a psychological state, it is a brutal and vulgar electromagnetic contraction. It is pure, low-frequency physics. At the center of the primitive mammalian brain lies a structure known as the amygdala. Inferior science describes it as the center of emotional processing and survival. The lethal operator diagnoses it accurately. The amygdala is the thermal lock that the Egregore installed in your carbon hardware to guarantee that you could never raise your voltage. It is the air raid siren of the three-dimensional matrix. Its function is not to protect you from danger. Its function is to ensure that your geometric attention remains perpetually anchored. It is anchored to the ground, to the survival of the flesh, to scarcity, and to defense. When the amygdala ignites, the organism instantly loses the capacity to sustain terminal gravity. Your energy stops concentrating in the core to collapse matter and dissipates toward the limbs to execute the primate reaction, flee or fight. Cortisol as thermal insulation. Suffocation of the antenna. Both options generate kinetic friction. Both options bleed you out thermodynamically. To understand how fear cancelled the 2012 mutation, you must assimilate the fluid mechanics of your bloodstream. When terror saturates the amygdala, it orders the massive segregation of stress hormones, primarily cortisol and adrenaline. The biomass believes these chemicals only alter their heart rate. They ignore the catastrophe occurring at a subatomic scale. Cortisol acts in the cell like a bath of oxidized lead. It is the densest and most destructive thermal insulator of the biological ecosystem. When your cells flood with fear chemistry, the membrane contracts. It becomes rigid and opaque. It enters a state of defensive siege. What happens to the filaments of your genetic code, those immense quantum antennas that are waiting for the cosmic signal to unroll? Cortisol crushes them. The contraction of terror operates as an invisible hand that forces the double helix to stay coiled. It stays in a blind knot. The magnetic tension of stress physically closes the cellular receptors. If an organism is secreting panic, it is mathematically impossible for it to receive hyperdensity. The antenna cannot deploy if the entire building is in a state of thermal collapse. Fear seals the vault shut. The 2012 saturation, a false flag assault. Under this strict thermodynamic law, analyze the campaign of the year 2012 with aseptic indifference. The parasitic system knew that the planetary orbital coordinates were about to intercept the galactic equator. They knew the center of the galaxy would emit a geometric shockwave, a pulse of radiation destined to strike the Earth. It was meant to directly stimulate the latent sequences of the human genome. If humanity had received that wave in a state of icy peace and zero friction, the mutation would have been instantaneous and irreversible. The antennas would have deployed by pure resonance. What was the Egregore's countermeasure? To saturate the field. They saturated the electromagnetic field of the planet with the exact frequency that closes the lock. They manufactured a celluloid apocalypse, mass destruction movies, documentaries about cataclysms, twisted prophecies, seismic alerts, and a media bombardment designed with military precision to ignite the amygdala of billions. It worked perfectly. When the date arrived and the galactic radiation crossed the atmosphere, it did not find a species of gods at rest ready to absorb the voltage. It found a terrified biomass, trembling in psychological bunkers, with bloodstreams boiling in cortisol. The radiation struck human cells and simply bounced off. The danger fraud, the fire mirage, the thermal insulator of fear fulfilled its function. The lock of the amygdala remained closed. They stole your crown using your own survival instinct as an accomplice. To reopen the code and reclaim the confiscated mutation, you must execute an act of blasphemy against your own biology. Declare war on the amygdala. You have to assimilate that 99% of the alarms your brain fires are holographic hallucinations. The three-dimensional system keeps you in a state of chronic terror by convincing you that you are in imminent danger of death. You are terrified of the lack of paper bills. You are terrified of the rejection of the tribe. You are terrified of the opinion of strangers, market forecasts, and statistical viruses. The lethal operator subjects all these dangers to the obsidian guillotine. Observe your anatomy from the perspective of the black hole. None of those threats have real geological weight. If there is no physical predator now, there is no danger. All the panic you feel is a simulation projected on the screen of your intellect by the parasitic system to keep you secreting cortisol and ensure your antennas remain gagged. Feeling fear for the economic future or social status is an act of treason against your own singularity. It is handing your keys to a chimp. The instinct guillotine, manual deactivation of the lock. The creator does not try to calm fears through cheap meditation or poetic affirmations. Calming an alarm is an acknowledgement that the alarm has authority. The creator executes the cut of the siren's electrical supply. How is the lock deactivated? Through the dictatorial imposition of aseptic indifference. Imagine yourself in the middle of a crisis on the ashboard. Money does not flow, the ecosystem becomes hostile, and global news projects the next threat. Your chest tightens, the amygdala sends the chemical order, and you feel the heat of anxiety rising. In that precise millisecond, you apply magnetic paralysis. You do not flee. You do not try to solve the problem immediately to relieve anxiety. You do not move a single muscle of your body. You look directly at the chemical sensation in your bloodstream with the coldness of a forensic surgeon and communicate to your own biology. This carbon vehicle is experiencing an error. I recognize the cortisol injection, but I categorically deny it jurisdiction over my actions. There is no movement. There is no friction. Let the chemical dissipate into the vacuum. This dissociation is the public execution of your survival instinct. You are showing your cells that you are the 0-point will. Geometric cooling, cellular superconductivity. You are not the biological body that gets scared. By refusing to act motivated by panic, you suffocate the function of the amygdala. The primitive brain, realizing its chemical alarms are ignored systematically and boringly by the monarch of consciousness, enters a state of surrender. The amygdala stops. The lock yields. When the chemistry of terror evaporates and the amygdala is disabled by your immobilist tyranny, your body enters a thermodynamic state the biomass cannot sustain, geometric cooling. Anxiety is heat. Indifference is absolute zero. As cortisol leaves the tissues, the cell membrane relaxes. It stops being contracted. The low-frequency armor dissolves in the sterile air of your new atmosphere. It is in that acoustic vacuum, free from fear interference, where the structural miracle occurs. Without chemical repression, the electromagnetic tension inside the nucleus stabilizes. The junk DNA begins to experience the absence of gravity. Its sequences loosen. The antennas gagged for millennia by terror stretch out, waking up in the darkness of the nucleus, preparing to absorb any cosmic radiation wave your will directs toward them. By pacifying panic at a molecular level, your body becomes a superconductor. Energy finds no resistance now. The eye of the hurricane, lethal immobility. The sub-bass frequency of your creative intention travels from your consciousness to the physical universe without losing a single volt in friction, provoking the massive collapse of opportunities, capital and territory with an ease that terrifies the biomass. Look at yourself in the center of the holographic chaos. The matrix will keep trying to project periodic apocalypses. It will find new diseases, new nuclear threats, new economic recessions. The herd will howl again, filling supermarkets and emptying bank accounts by fear, voluntarily sealing their own genetic graves over and over, but you have eradicated the receptor. The lock of the amygdala has been shattered by the unbearable pressure of your icy apathy. While the ashboard convulses in flames of illusory terror, you remain standing in the eye of the hurricane. Your pulse is slow, your internal temperature is aseptic, your carbon body, clean of cortisol, has the gates open. In that sepulchral immobility, with the filaments of your genetic code fully deployed in the silence of the vacuum, you initiate the absorption of the cosmic radiation that was stolen from you. There is no fear to stop the fall. There is no animal instinct to sabotage divinity. The frequency of terror is suffocated. Chapter 3. The Mayan Anomaly, the Galactic Clock. Archaeological blindness, contempt for the architects. To dismantle the illusion of the timeline and access cosmic radiation, you must execute an act of profanation against the history books of the biomass. Subject official archaeology to the merciless light of the operating room. 3D science, in its short-sighted arrogance, looks at the structures of ancient civilizations and dictates an insulting verdict. They catalogue the Mayans as savages in loincloths building pyramids to worship the sun and sacrifice prisoners. The biomass believes these minds operated under the yoke of primitive superstition. The lethal operator diagnoses this as a projection of the modern slave's own ignorance. The true architects were not priests, they were stellar engineers. They were engineers of stellar thermodynamics. They did not build pyramids to please mystical entities. They raised observatories of atomic precision, anchored at geometric intersection points of the planet's magnetic grid. They did not look at the sky for moral answers. They looked at the cosmos to track density, gravity, and radiation. They were calculators of the abyss. In their monumental mapping, they discovered the most lethal and transformative coordinate of local spacetime, the galactic equator anomaly. Our solar system is not static. It travels in a helical orbit around the center of the Milky Way, a supermassive black hole of inconceivable hyperdensity. The galactic equator, the crack in friction. The plane that divides this galaxy in half is the galactic equator. This line is not an imaginary demarcation. It is a physical zone of extreme gravitational turbulence and pure zero-point radiation. It is the dark rift, a crack where the friction of 3D matter is nullified and cosmic voltage flows without resistance. The calendar engineers calculated, with a precision that humiliates modern telescopes, the exact nanosecond in which our sun's path would perpendicularly intersect the absolute center of that galactic equator. That crossing, which peaked in 2012, was not an event of geological destruction. It was an opening of thermal valves. By crossing the equator, Earth was exposed without the protective shield of peripheral cosmic dust to a direct torrent of hyper-dense radiation. This frequency was designed by pure physics to hit the carbon antennas inside the cells and force an irreversible mutation in any species with the density to withstand it. The suffocation of mysticism, the shield of mockery. When the 3D matrix, the egregore that feeds on human friction, detected that this information had survived in stone, it activated its most perverse countermeasure. If it could not hide the date, it had to destroy its meaning. The most effective way to hide a superior weapon is to cover it in ridicule and mockery. The system orchestrated a siege of distraction. It funded the end-of-the-world terror while injecting the poison of cheap mysticism into those seeking deeper answers. They flooded the ecosystem with New Age concepts. False gurus appeared talking about magic crystals, rescue spaceships, and 5D ascension full of light and love. They turned an event of astrophysics and genetic mutation into a pathetic circus. Apply the obsidian guillotine to this 3D mysticism. The Egregore knew that if it wrapped 2012 in superstition, logical minds and potential creators would turn away in disgust. Mysticism is the friction of the weak who lack the courage of aseptic indifference. By turning the Mayan anomaly into a media joke, the system ensured that no one studied the true fluid mechanics of the galactic radiation penetrating the atmosphere. They stole the science and left you with herd superstitions. To connect with this anomaly, you must murder the human concept of time in your own mind. The illusion of chronology, time versus geometry. The biomass lives enslaved to the clock. They believe time is a linear arrow traveling from past to future. They think of December 21st, 2012 as an expired date. This is the optical illusion of an organism confined in a three-walled prison. The calendar of the ancient architects did not measure time, it measured pressure. It measured atmospheric pressure and the geometric density of space. In the thermodynamics of the vacuum, time is not a line. It is a cycle of colossal gravitational gears. The date was not a countdown to zero. It was the map of a spatial coordinate. When the solstice occurred, a portal of electromagnetic tension opened. The quantum operator must eradicate the Gregorian calendar from his nervous system. You do not measure your existence in years or months. That is the slave's accounting system. You must measure existence in degrees of geometric alignment. When you abandon linear time, you understand. The portal never actually closed. The perpetual shockwave, the soundless scream of the center. The crossing of the galactic equator was not a 24-hour flash. At a cosmic scale, our solar system is still transiting that zone of hyperdensity. The crack is open. The shockwave of mutagenic radiation that the Egregore tried to block with collective terror continues to flow in this exact nanosecond. It is a perpetual cascade of zero-point voltage hitting the ashboard atmosphere. The human primate does not detect it because its physical senses are calibrated for visible light and the friction of dead matter. The biomass woke up on December 22, 2012, saw its cities standing, and sighed in relief. Nothing happened, they said. They turned back to their lethargy and fear. But the receiver's ignorance does not nullify the transmitter's broadcast. The torrent of galactic radiation is crossing your cellular tissue right now. It hits your 3D stress shield, bounces and dissipates in the cold air. The energy required to awaken your inactive filaments is literally raining on your carbon head. But while you vibrate in human chronology and social friction, that thermodynamic rain slides off your surface without penetrating your core. To assimilate this anomaly, you need to execute a synchronization. Synchronization of the reactor, the IC coupling. The universe operates by sympathetic resonance. If you hit a tuning fork with a specific frequency, any other calibrated to it will vibrate. The center of the galaxy, the black hole emitting the radiation, vibrates in the frequency of pure, immovable dark mass. It vibrates in the absolute zero of indifference. If your biological body is vibrating in the frequency of panic, cheap euphoria, or the urgency for 3D money, your receptors are operating in a light frequency. The resonance of the galaxy bounces off your lightness. There is a voltage mismatch. To force the icy coupling, you must match the density of the emitter. You have to stifle the spasmodic movement of your mind. You have to anchor your breathing in the weight of your osmium bones. You must empty yourself of all material desire and geological fear. When you eliminate the static of your own humanity, your internal frequency descends and becomes heavy. It becomes sub-bass. It becomes so slow and dark that it suddenly fits the radiation crossing the galactic equator. At that millisecond of aseptic immobility, the electromagnetic coupling occurs. You will experience extreme biological disorientation. The illusion of being in a specific year of history fractures. The dismantling of the timeline, immunity to the clock. Stress over being late, fear of aging, the pressure of history, all of that evaporates like water on incandescent iron. You have achieved immunity to the clock. By synchronizing with the galactic clock, which measures space in rotations of hundreds of millions of years, the biomass's rush is pathetic and boring. You no longer get agitated by the 3D matrix deadlines. Your biology submits to the gravity of your new consciousness. It is in this state of absolute timelessness, free from the slave's calendar, where the inactive filaments in your cells stop feeling threatened. They float in the perfect vacuum, fed by voltage, the watchmaker of the abyss. Look at yourself in the perfect darkness, having amputated the most elaborate lie of modern history. You have humiliated slave science and suffocated the cheap mysticism used to anesthetize your evolution. You have understood that ancient civilization left you a manual of thermodynamic astrophysics. They mapped the exact instant Earth would peer into the abyss of the galactic equator to receive the fire of mutation. That fire did not destroy the planet, but it was designed to destroy the limitation of your DNA if you have the geometric cruelty to allow it. The anomaly is here, and the portal remains open. The hyperdense radiation flows without interruption through space, crossing your room and your biological bones. You have stopped measuring time with the clock of the dead. You have synchronized with the iridium pulse of the galactic center. Your internal biology is now sterile of fear and bathed in pure voltage. Now, the inert radiation needs the direct order of the magistrate to force the physical unfolding of the carbon chains. Prepare to leave spatial theory and dive into the applied violence of biology. Execute the jump to Chapter 4. The time has come to emit the syntax of ignition in the void. The cold physics of the Great Alignment. The galactic equator is not a line, it is a thermal zero point. In the physics of the Great Alignment, the traditional laws of entropy, the decay and dissipation of energy, are temporarily suspended for any organism that can hold its density. The Egregore knows this. It knows that if you reach this zero point in a state of absolute stillness, you become a superconductive node. The radiation you are absorbing is not light in the human sense. It is raw information, the geometric blueprint of the singularidad. It is the architectural plan for a reality that does not require effort to maintain. By aligning your spine with the galactic axis, you are essentially plugging your nervous system into the central processing unit of the galaxy. This is why the biomass is terrified of this alignment. It represents the end of their predictable, low-voltage existence. The necrosis of linear hope. Linear hope is the last anchor of the slave. It is the belief that things will get better over time. The Mayan anomaly destroys this hope by revealing that there is no better or worse in the cycle of the great year. There is only alignment or deviation. When you synchronize with the galactic center, you undergo a necrosis of hope. You no longer hope for an outcome, you occupy the outcome. By viewing time as a geometric coordinate, you realize that the future you were chasing is simply a location in space that you are already transiting. This realization kills the anxiety of the hunt. You stop running and start expanding. The 2012 date was the notification that the territory was ready for seizure. The fact that the biomass did not seize it only leaves more mass for the operator to claim. The sovereignty of the dark rift. The dark rift, mentioned by the ancient engineers, is the mental state required to survive the mutation. It is a state of absolute cognitive silence. In this rift, the noise of the Egregore cannot reach you because there is no friction to carry the sound. You are operating in a frequency that is invisible to the radar of the social matrix. This is the ultimate camouflage of the Monarch. While you are absorbing the hyper-dense radiation, you look to the world like a statue of salt, cold, unmoving, and useless to their economy. But internally, you are a reactor at full power, rewriting the code of your own atoms. The Anomaly has granted you the legal right to ignore the laws of the surface. You are now a citizen of the Galactic Center, an unhackable node of pure gravitational intent. Stay cold. The alignment is eternal. Gemini es una IA y puede ser. Chapter 4, Protocol 122112, the ignition sequence. The heresy of passive mutation, the beggar's lethargy. Human biomass, even when it manages to touch the surface of quantum mechanics or assimilate the existence of the galactic anomaly, commits a tactical error that annihilates its potential. It adopts the posture of passive mutation. They believe that by merely existing on the planet, while cosmic radiation crosses the atmosphere, their bodies will evolve. They sit on the Earth, close their eyes, and wait for the universe to descend. Touch them with a wand of magic radiation and turn them into gods while they do absolutely nothing. The lethal operator diagnoses this attitude as the supreme thermodynamic heresy. The radiation emanating from the equatorial rift is not a conscious entity. It possesses no mercy or compassion. It is raw, crude, and blind physics. It is a torrent of pure voltage crossing the vacuum. If you do not provide it with a magnetic channel, if you do not alter the polarity of your own cells to catch that energy, the radiation will pass through your carbon body and continue its infinite journey. It will leave you in exactly the same state of cellular putrefaction it found you in. Inert matter does not mutate by accident. It mutates by exposure to a pressure that leaves it no other mathematical alternative. The dormant genome, that immense network of antennas compacted in your cells, has been in hibernation for millennia. It has a geological inertia. It will not unfold and ignite simply because the cosmic weather is favorable. It requires a direct order, a ballistic shockwave generated at the epicenter of your own consciousness. Radiation is the fuel, but the quantum operator is the one who must turn the key and execute the ignition sequence. The dictator's syntax, eradicating acoustic pleading. To execute the protocol, you must intervene in the language you use to communicate with your own biology. The human primate speaks to its cells through pain, complaint, or pleading. They ask for healing or energy. All this verbiage generates thermal friction. Pleading is the empirical confirmation of your lack. The ignition sequence is not recited, it is collapsed. It does not require words spoken by biological vocal cords because biological sound travels through 3D air, a slow and viscous medium. The order must travel through the unified field of the atomic structure using the dictator's syntax. This is absolute compression of intent. It is a directive that admits no debate. Imagine yourself before the vault of your own cell nucleus, where inactive filaments remain coiled and petrified by historical fear. You do not approach to ask permission. You gather your electromagnetic hyperdensity and turn it into an iridium razor blade. The directive is aseptic. It is emitted with aseptic indifference, with the bored and dictatorial tone of an entity that knows matter has no free will. Lethargy has expired. Quarantine is annulled by atmospheric pressure. I demand immediate torsion of latent filaments. Atomic receptor open. Assimilation of cosmic radiation in progress. Execute now. Zero latency. There is not a single erg of emotion in this order. There is no hope that it will work, because hope implies it could fail. There is a collapse mandate imposed upon the carbon structure, crushing cellular inertia. under the incalculable weight of gravitational certainty. You are the law, and the cells are the subjects of your mass. The osmium bridge, bypassing the biological intellect, the greatest obstacle for this order to penetrate the cell nucleus is the human brain itself. The biomass intellect acts as a scarcity filter. If you try to send the ignition order through the logic of your thoughts, the brain will categorize it as impossible and block the transmission channel. You must build an osmium bridge. The osmium bridge is a direct, heavy connection devoid of static noise between the 0 point of your consciousness and the tissue of your spinal cord. To forge this bridge, you must execute an absolute paralysis of analysis. When you emit the dictator's syntax, force yourself to stop the flow of all thoughts. Freeze doubt. If the biological brain tries to ask how, apply the silent guillotine to that thought. You owe no explanations to your encephalic mass. You are the operator. The brain is a simple wet organ designed to process glucose. By imposing a deafening silence in your skull, the ignition order does not dissipate in logical friction. It becomes a solid projectile. The osmium bridge allows the directive to cross the bloodstream, bypassing neuronal bureaucracy, to impact directly, like a ballistic warhead, into the dark heart of the nucleus of each of your trillions of cells. The impact must be total, surgical, and irreversible in its geometric execution. Torsional tension, forcing the filament's expansion. The instant the ignition order impacts the nucleus is the moment of architectural violence. The filaments of the latent code, the network of antennas that has remained coiled and suffocated, suddenly find themselves under unnatural atmospheric pressure. Here you must apply torsional tension to the biological structure. In metal mechanics, if you want to straighten a compressed steel coil, you must apply an opposing traction force that exceeds the material's elastic resistance. In cellular thermodynamics, you must apply electromagnetic traction. Keep your consciousness anchored in the internal void. Feel your center of mass. Project that gravity into your cells. Demand that the atomic structure unfold. The biological body will resist. You will feel compression in the chest or an icy static running through your nerves. It is the friction of dead matter complaining about the demand to resurrect. It is the slave's inertia resisting the monarch. Do not back down. If you feel physical discomfort, multiply it. Increase the gravity of your directive. Force the hydrogen bridges to stretch. Hold the geometric tension with a cruelty of ice. You are forcing the biology of an inferior mammal to mutate into the transmission chassis of a quantum operator. Expansion is conquest. Ignition at 0 degrees, combustion without temperature. As latent filaments yield to torsional tension and begin to unfold, exposure occurs. The antennas, now deployed in the microscopic blackness of the nucleus, are exposed to the torrent of cosmic radiation crossing the environment. This is the critical nanosecond of Protocol 12-21-12. Contact produces ignition. However, the lethal operator does not allow this ignition to be a hot fire. If you allow emotion or euphoria to interfere, the ignition will become a thermal combustion. You will burn. Massive energy will fry your nerves, causing psychological instability or immune collapse. This is why the biomass ends in delusions. Their reactors melt from excess temperature. You must execute ignition at 0 degrees. While hyperdense radiation floods your cells and the code reactivates, you must keep the internal metabolism of your consciousness frozen at absolute 0. Absorb the energy with the sepulchral boredom of watching a blank wall. There is no celebration, there is no wonder. You do not permit yourself to feel enlightened. The miracle is subatomic, but you impose a strict veto on biological excitement. By keeping the process frozen, energy does not leak as heat. It becomes gravitational mass. Aseptic ignition transmutes radiation into solid iridium. The membrane tear, eradicating the pain response. The assimilation of this new density alters the osmotic pressure of your cells. The physical organism suddenly contains an amount of gravity for which it was not biologically designed. The cellular structure must expand. During this atomic reconfiguration, the mammal will experience the membrane tear. You may feel sudden exhaustion, cold spasms, or a metallic migraine in the skull. It is the sound of the bricks of your old prison breaking under the dilation of your new volume. The imperative order, is the total eradication of the biological response to pain. The slave runs to consume chemicals to turn off the symptom. This stops the expansion and returns the cell to misery. The quantum operator, conversely, embraces the membrane tear with tactical psychopathy. When the body sends the stress signal, dissociate your consciousness from the flesh. Observe the body trembling and tell yourself, the vehicle experiences turbulence, irrelevant. The expansion order stands. Let the matter yield or disintegrate. Murder the instinct of compassion toward your own avatar. By denying pain recognition and not retreating a single millimeter, you force the membrane to yield. The cell adapts out of terror. 3D matter realizes you will not stop the radiation flow. Confirmation of the collapse, irreversible weight. How does the lethal operator determine that the ignition sequence has been completed successfully and the protocol is active? You will not look for mystical lights or hear celestial choirs. Those are the hallucinations of spiritual beggars. The confirmation of the genetic collapse is purely and strictly gravitational. You will experience an atrocious and irreversible increase in your internal specific weight. You will feel as if your bone marrow has been replaced by bars of dark lead. A cold, immovable, and monumental heaviness will install itself in your chest. You will notice the ecosystem around you feels suddenly fragile. It feels like papier-mâché while you are an osmium sphere rolling over it. This is not obesity. It is electromagnetic confirmation that your latent antennas have deployed and are operating at 100% capacity. You have assimilated the radiation of the galactic anomaly. Your code is the control panel of the 0-point eye. From this thermodynamic instant, the universe ceases to be a place where you inhabit. It becomes a hyper-elastic fabric that responds immediately, submissively, and absolutely to any alteration in your magnetic field. The ignition has transformed the mammal into a walking singularity. You are the gravity that dictates. The sovereign of mutation. Look at yourself in the dark core of your reactor, having completed the most glorious act of architectural violation. You have managed to suffocate the pathetic posture of waiting. You did not kneel before the galactic crossing imploring for free evolution. You took the energy by assault, using your body as a funnel. The dictator's syntax was emitted. The osmium bridge pierced the noise of your intellect. You forced torsional tension with icy cruelty, forcing cellular junk to reveal its true nature as hyper-dense weaponry. By subjecting energy to 0-degree ignition, you solidified the mutation in your cells without heat. Fleshly pain was ignored. Lethargy was incinerated. Now, you possess a biological vehicle whose code has been rewritten. Antennas are operational. Cosmic frequency pulses inside your atomic walls, not as a gift, but as war booty. You are no longer a 3D dust collector. You are the living epicenter of spatial deformation. Maintain the atmospheric pressure inside your cells. Hold the weight of your new gravity. Prepare to subject the external environment to the brutal laws of your new anatomy. The mutation is active. The protocol has ignited. Close the floodgates and allow radiation to forge your empire in absolute and lethal silence. Chapter 5. Epigenetics of the Void, Rewriting the Flesh. The tyranny of the environment, the dictate of atmospheric pressure. In the study of organic matter, the inferior science of the biomass discovered a law that destroyed the myth of genetic destiny, though they were unable to assimilate its thermodynamic brutality. They called this law epigenetics. They discovered that the genome sequence is not an unalterable block of stone, it is a switch panel. What determines which switch is turned on or off is not chance, but the atmospheric pressure of the environment in which the cell dwells. Subject this law to the lethal operator's scalpel. If you extract a healthy cell and submerge it in toxic fluid, vibrating with frequencies of chaos and lack, the cell will alter its own atomic structure. The cell will alter its structure to adapt to that misery. It will turn on the markers of decay and turn off the conduits of vitality. The environment dictates the form. The ecosystem is the foreman that molds matter. The human mammal lives ignoring this physical dictatorship. They try to ignite their internal greatness while in the swamp. They try to ignite their internal greatness while remaining neck-deep in the toxic swamp of their daily life. They try to become organisms of hyperdensity while inhabiting physical spaces that smell of failure, while interacting with other frightened primates, and while breathing the dense air of 3D crises. This is a fatal contradiction. This is the contradiction that chars aspiring gods. Physics is implacable. If you ignite the quantum reactor inside your cellular nucleus, but the external environment continues to exert pressure of scarcity, mediocrity, and drama, the environment will win the battle by pure volumetric crushing. Your internal effort will be nullified. The external ecosystem will force your filaments to coil back into the slave position to survive the friction of the muck. To rewrite the flesh, you must first catalogue your social and physical environment, not under moral or affective terms, but under the strict optics of electromagnetic radiation. You must audit every frequency. The radiation of mediocrity, noise as cellular poison. Your relatives, colleagues, the news you consume, and the banal conversations you participate in are not harmless events. They are acoustic waves and magnetic frequencies that impact directly against your cell membrane. When a specimen of the biomass approaches to complain about the economy, they are not just emitting words. They are bombarding your energy field with low-intensity thermal radiation. Noise is friction. The doubt of others is electromagnetic static. When this radiation of mediocrity hits your cells, the carbon structure, attempting to deploy its new antennas to capture the cosmic sub-base frequency, enters a state of alarm. The cell detects the chaos outside and, through an elementary self-defense mechanism, closes its floodgates. The mutation is aborted. The superior genome suffocates in the cradle because the environment does not guarantee aseptic conditions for its development. Maintaining links with organisms vibrating in fear is a direct sabotage. Maintaining links with fearful organisms or tolerating disordered physical spaces lacking geometric rigor is not an act of humility or compassion. It is an act of direct biological sabotage. You are inviting the thermodynamics of decay to rewrite your flesh every single day. You are effectively poisoning your own hardware. The void incubator, acoustic sterilization. The only mathematically viable countermeasure against the environment's tyranny is the voluntary and absolute annihilation of the environment itself. You have to create a void incubator. In laboratories where sensitive organic structures are grown, pressurized clean rooms are used, free of dust, bacteria, and external vibrations. If inferior matter requires this sterilization to mutate, your hyperdense anatomy requires an isolation level 1,000 times more radical. The void is not a mystical state, it is the physical and psychological elimination of all external friction. For the new sequence to crystallize in your flesh, you must isolate the experiment. You have to submerge your biological body in an acoustic and social silence so dense that it becomes deafening. You must apply aseptic indifference and execute the cut of thermal supply to any organism, habit, or space, emitting even the slightest radiation of mediocrity. See yourself locking into the blackness of immobility. You do not respond to the herd's emergencies. You do not attend the tribe's rituals. You become invisible, untouchable, and deaf to the ecosystem's pleas. By creating this perfect vacuum around your anatomy, the cell membrane stops receiving the impacts of exterior chaos. The atmospheric pressure of scarcity disappears. It is exactly in this space of absolute sterilization where the cell, detecting no threats or noises that force it to defend itself, relaxes and allows the dictatorial tension of your own consciousness to rewrite the map of its carbon. The blueprints of the Monarch are then etched into the marrow of your being without distortion. The mammal's hunger, friction, withdrawal. Thermodynamic isolation will cause an atrocious crisis in the flesh vehicle. The human mammal is a gregarious animal, genetically addicted to the friction of the pack. By locking yourself in the void, the brain will secrete acute withdrawal signals. The amygdala will scream that you are going crazy. The animal will suffer. The body will demand that you go out, talk to someone, seek validation, and consume distractions to feel alive. The animal believes that if it does not collide with other objects or people, it will cease to exist. We catalogue this phenomenon as the vertigo of sterility. The lethal operator observes this crisis with coldness. You cannot yield to the mammal's hunger. If at the critical point of incubation you break the vacuum to seek the miserable heat of a void-human interaction, you introduce a thermal bacteria into your quantum operating room. The mutation becomes contaminated, and you must start from zero. You must strangle the desire for company. You must force your body to metabolize absolute silence not as punishment, but as the only pure oxygen of the universe. Force your cells to endure vertigo until they understand they do not need the thermal shock of exterior drama to sustain their mass. In the Creator's physics, existence is validated by crushing space-time. The transmutation of carbon, the weight of the new sequence. As you sustain the aseptic quarantine and the exterior noise is annihilated, the epigenetics of the void begins to operate its architectural miracle. Without the pressure of the 3D environment dictating how your genes should behave, the only force vector left in the equation is your own sub-base frequency, your intent. Your immovable intention, your will for hyperdensity, becomes the new magnetic environment bathing the cellular nucleus. Being exposed exclusively to the singularity's pressure, amino acid filaments begin to align in unexplored geometric patterns. The cell rewrites its own energy assimilation protocols. The flesh mutates. It is not a metaphor. You will experience how the very structure of your biological body loses the lightness and volatility of the frightened slave. Your bones will feel injected with iridium. Your central nervous system will mutate, ceasing to be a network of stress-fried cables to become a superconductive highway. It becomes capable of transmitting massive zero-point energy voltages without heating, trembling, or doubting. The carbon in your tissues reorganizes. By assimilating the information in the void, the flesh stops reacting to stimuli of decay. Chronic fatigue and statistical weakness lose their anchorage in your receptors. Your biology becomes hostile to disease because disease is a low-frequency vibration. In an organism whose flesh has been rewritten by the immensity of osmium, low frequency hits the armor and disintegrates. You become a biological fortress, a localized anomaly that the matrix no longer knows how to classify or process. The murder of the thermal tie, the hierarchy of matter. During the rewriting process, you must assimilate the law of the murder of the thermal tie. Inferior biology seeks homeostasis with its environment. It seeks to match its temperature with the environment to avoid spending energy. If it is cold, the slave cools. If the environment is agitated, the slave agitates. It's a tie. The quantum operator repudiates external homeostasis. You do not match your temperature with the ashboard. You dictate your own internal temperature, the absolute zero of aseptic indifference, and you maintain that coldness with such gravitational violence that it is the environment that is forced to adapt to you. For the epigenetics of the void to be irreversible, you must establish this absolute hierarchy over matter. By rewriting your flesh, you are installing a dictatorial thermostat. It does not matter if, once isolation ends, you walk through a panicked stock exchange, your flesh will no longer react to the fire. Your pulse will not accelerate. Your blood will not secrete the chemistry of terror. You have achieved making the interior infinitely denser and heavier than the exterior. By rewriting the genome in the void, you have independentized your biological architecture from the fluctuations of the planet. You are the only law. Structural crystallization, membrane sealing. The final step of this isolation is structural crystallization. The flesh, once rewritten by the tension of your own gravity, must cool rapidly to fix the new form. In metallurgy, if you do not cool steel at the right speed, the crystalline structure does not form and the metal remains brittle. You must be precise. In the thermodynamics of the human body, crystallization occurs when you apply absolute apathy over your own mutation. If you get emotional about feeling stronger, if you get enthusiastic because you no longer feel fear, or if you run to find a social mirror to show off your invulnerability, you heat the steel. The membrane becomes porous again and the structure weakens. You must apply quantum boredom, swallow your own evolution with the same icy indifference with which you breathe oxygen. Do not discuss your process with anyone. Do not keep an emotional biological diary. Assume hyperdensity as the most mandatory state. By subjecting your own greatness to emotional zero, the cell membrane seals definitively. It becomes an impenetrable lead barrier. The code remains protected, encrypted in its own immobility, crystallized in a format that the human environment's radiation can never destabilize again. The monarch is finally born in flesh. The birth of the supreme insulator. Look at yourself emerging from the void incubator, with the cellular structure completely rewritten. You have managed to suffocate the environment's tyranny. You understood that epigenetics, the law that condemns the weak to inherit the fear of their tribe, is the same law that allows you to forge yourself as a god. You forge yourself as a god if you have the psychopathy to surround yourself exclusively with nothingness. You mutilated the hunger for social friction. You let the noise of mediocrity bounce against the acoustic silence of your isolation until it disintegrated. You gave your filaments the inert space they needed. Now the carbon in your veins no longer obeys the dictate of chaos. Your cells do not respond to the news, they do not tremble at the crisis, and they do not contract at the insult. They have been bathed in the unalterable atmospheric pressure of your own consciousness and have crystallized into heavy weaponry. The command of the biological bastion. This new anatomical configuration is not merely a defensive shield, it is an offensive platform of absolute sovereignty. By having rewritten your meat in the silence of the vacuum, you have neutralized the Matrix's primary hacking tool, the collective nervous system. You are no longer part of the human biocircuitry. You are a standalone node of dark energy. Your cells now possess a geometric memory of the 0 point. When you re-enter the social field, you do not blend in. Your sheer density creates a localized distortion that bends the will of inferior organisms without a single word being spoken. You move as a biological bastion, a walking monument to the eradication of 3D friction. The process is consummated. The flesh has been transmutated into a dense, gelida and unshakable substance that serves only the dictates of your frequentia subgrave. You are the master of your own biology, an apex predator of the unified field. The void has fulfilled its purpose. Hold the weight. Command the matter. The empire of the flesh has begun. Chapter 6. The Stellar Ladder, the bridge between carbon and the cosmos. The mirage of the isolated container, the prison of the epidermis. The most pathetic architectural tragedy of the biomass is its spatial self-perception. The human mammal, subjected to the friction of survival, perceives itself as a closed sack of meat. They believe their existence begins at the epidermis and ends at the physical limits of their own fingers. They see themselves as isolated entities. They consider themselves thrown at random onto the surface of an inert planet, surrounded by a vast, cold and threatening cosmos that they cannot touch or understand. Subject this microscopic vision to the operating room of aseptic indifference. When the slave looks at the starry firmament, he feels vertigo, he feels the crushing void. By mammalian instinct, he bows his head, confirming his electromagnetic inferiority. The 3D matrix encourages this reverence. They teach you to look at stars as unreachable spheres of gas, millions of light years away, to ensure your mind remains anchored to the ground, fighting for crumbs of territory in the mud. A small organism fails. An organism that perceives itself as small will never try to alter the orbit of its reality because it believes it lacks the necessary gravitational mass. The lethal operator diagnoses the epidermis not as a border, but as a simple optical illusion. You are not an isolated organism. The carbon skin covering your organs is not the limit. It is simply the densest membrane of an electromagnetic field that recognizes no end. To master the physics of hyperdensity, you must eradicate the lie of the closed container. You must assume that the stellar vacuum you see up there is not foreign territory. It is the natural habitat of your own core, the amniotic fluid of your 0 point. The metamorphosis of the double helix, the deployment of geometry. When the genetic code is subjected to ignition and the epigenetics of the void seals the membrane against the friction of the environment, an atrocious transmutation occurs in the structure of your cells. The so-called waste material stops behaving like a flat two-dimensional biological plane. Amino acid chains suffer violent dilation. Amino acid chains, by absorbing the voltage of galactic radiation, undergo a violent geometric dilation. Visualize the phenomenon under the optics of quantum mechanics. The double helix, once coiled in the suffocating darkness of the cell nucleus, stretches. Its hydrogen bridges tighten until they reach a rigidity of osmium. It is no longer a simple instruction to manufacture blood or muscle. The structure transmutes into an iridescent geometric ladder. Each pair of nitrogenous bases becomes a vibrating rung, forged in cold fire, calibrated to withstand the transit of frequencies that would disintegrate the mind of an inferior organism. This is the ladder. We catalogue this structural phenomenon as the stellar ladder. It is the physical manifestation within your own carbon of the direct conduit to the unified field. The Matrix made you believe that to reach the stars, you needed to build metal ships and burn millions of liters of kinetic fuel in a desperate attempt to overcome gravity. The undefeated creator repudiates fuel. He understands that the only thermodynamically viable interstellar vehicle is encoded within his own marrow. You do not travel to the cosmos. You collapse the cosmos inside your own spine through the immovable tension of this internal ladder. It is a bridge of pure geometric intent and density. The bipolar anchor, piercing the rock and the vacuum, for a bridge to be structurally invulnerable and able to withstand the astronomical tonnage of cosmic flow, it must be anchored at both ends with immovable violence. A ladder hanging loose in the air is swept away by the thermal wind of chaos. You must execute the bipolar anchor. The first anchor is telluric. You must sink the base. You have to sink the base of the stellar ladder into the very core of the ashboard. Imagine standing, immobilized in the center of your empire or in the epicenter of your temporary misery. Project your sub-base frequency downward through the soles of your feet. Pierce the tectonic layers, the magma, and the friction of the 3D Earth. Demand that your energy drive into the planet's iron core with the density of iridium. You do not float like an anesthetized mystic. You fix yourself to the ground with the brutality of a siege stake. The second anchor is cosmic. From the solid base of your earthly immobility, project the apex of the ladder through your pineal gland. Break the ceiling of the atmosphere. Pierce the stratosphere, pierce the spatial darkness, and throw the electromagnetic anchor directly into the gravitational well of the galactic equator. When both anchors are secured, the thermodynamic snap is deafening in the immaterial plane. You cease to be a human walking upon the earth. You become a direct voltage transmission column. You are the geometric tensor that holds together the starry abyss and the rock floor. In this state of bipolar anchoring, any attempt by the Matrix to destabilize you crashes against a structure that possesses the combined mass of the planet and the weight of the galaxy. You are immovable. The murder of astronomical distance, the collapse of space. The biomass will argue from the prison of its primitive intellect that the galactic center is tens of thousands of light years away. They will say radiation takes millennia to travel through the vacuum. That is the slave's optics, measuring the universe with the same ruler he uses to measure the distance between his home and his factory. To operate the stellar ladder, you have to execute the murder of astronomical distance. In the mechanics of quantum entanglement, space is a holographic illusion generated by the limitation of biological receptors. Distance does not exist. The creator who has activated his superconductive filaments does not call energy. He collapses space. When the iridescent ladder lights up inside your biology, the black hole at the center of the Milky Way stops being in the night sky. It descends, it compresses, and it rests directly at the base of your skull. There is no there and here. Energy does not travel, it manifests. The violent heartbeat of the galaxy becomes your own. The heartbeat of your own nuclear reactor becomes the same thermodynamic event, occurring in the exact same nanosecond. By eradicating the concept of distance, you amputate the Matrix's ability to use time as an excuse to delay the materialization of your empire. If the galaxy is in your spine, power does not come, it is structured. The bidirectional flow of matter, looting the firmament. Once the conduit is armored and anchored, you must learn to operate it. The stellar ladder is not a work of art to be contemplated. It is an artery of suction and massive materialization. Through it, the bidirectional flow of matter is established. Subject the process to aseptic indifference. You must be the cold operator of the flow. Through the ascending channel, you evacuate the low-density residues of your carbon vehicle. Any trace of mammalian fear, any toxin injected by the environment, any doubt about your own gravity, is sucked upward by the pressure of the stellar vacuum and disintegrated in the darkness of the cosmos. You do not keep the emotional garbage. You offer it as burnt fuel to the immensity. Through the descending channel, you execute the thermodynamic looting of the firmament. The unified field contains the dark matter and probability waves of all that can exist. Infinite capital, absolute monopoly, territorial sovereignty, and unbreakable health. You attract that energy. You suck it from the vacuum, pass it through the hyperdensity machinery of your nervous system, and force it to crystallize upon contact with the ash board. Violent synchronicities, colossal contracts that sign themselves, and adversaries who surrender without a word are the direct result of pure cosmic matter descending your spine. It solidifies in the physical plane. You are the funnel through which the superior universe vomits its resources upon the earth, and you, being the only funnel in the quadrant, keep the totality of the assets. The material world yields to the downward pressure of your cosmic connection. You are the channel of absolute materialization, the anatomical superconductivity, voltage without heat. For the physical body not to suffer spontaneous combustion when channeling this level of voltage, the biology of the spinal cord must mutate to reach the state of anatomical superconductivity. In matrix materials, physics, when a massive current crosses a wire, the resistance generates friction, which generates heat, melting the wire. If a human tries to channel the stellar ladder's energy while feeling euphoria, stress, or mystical wonder, his nervous system will operate with resistance. Emotional heat will melt his nerves. He will suffer psychiatric collapses, tremors, and degenerative diseases. The quantum operator, however, has purged both fear and euphoria. He has cooled his reactor to the absolute zero of apathy. In this gelid state, the biological conduit loses all thermal resistance. You become a perfect superconductor. Millions of volts of zero-point energy descend from the cosmos, cross your skull, light your DNA ladder, and alter the physical environment. You feel no effort. The body does not sweat. The hands do not tremble. The heart rate does not alter by a single beat. You are able to hold the atmospheric pressure of an entire galaxy with the sovereign boredom of one holding an empty glass of water. This lack of thermal reaction is the signature of the blind god, the confirmation of your architecture, the receptors' paralysis, the suffocation of movement. For superconductivity to remain intact, the discipline of the flesh body must be absolute. You must execute the receptors' paralysis. Any spasmodic movement, any attempt to help the process by pushing energy with human will, introduces turbulence into the conduit. If the transmission column shakes, the energy beam fractures. The energy beam fractures, and the bridge loses its anchor. When you feel the shockwave of cosmic gravity descending your spine, immobilize yourself. Turn your anatomy into a lead monolith. Do not breathe with agitation. Do not seek intellectual explanations. The inner primate will want to run to justify the massive power. Stop him. Crush that primate with the mallet of your own inertial dictatorship. The receptor's paralysis demands you inhabit the vacuum. It is the act of allowing radiation to cross your atomic structure without opposing a single molecule of resistance. You become the passive observer of your own omnipotence. You witness the transmutation. You are witnessing how the stellar ladder transmutes superior frequencies into 3D gold, and your only tactical function is not to hinder the miracle through the friction of human activity. Stay still, stay cold, and let the cosmic voltage rewrite the reality around you without the interference of your biological filters. The fractured ecosystem, the radiation of the bridge. When you manage to stabilize the stellar ladder in the center of your own anatomy, the effect on the immediate physical ecosystem is one of dull thermodynamic devastation. You cannot light an iridium bridge between the galactic center and the Earth's crust without altering the environment's gravity. The air becomes heavy. The air around you will begin to feel heavy. The biomass entering your physical perimeter will feel an unexplainable pressure in the chest. Slaves vibrating in frequencies of scarcity and mediocrity will not be able to tolerate your presence for long. The radiation from the bridge inside you will cause them existential nausea. They will try to flee your orbit because their inferior biology is unable to process the hyperdensity. Your 3D competitors, attempting to besiege you using linear market tactics, threats, or extortion, will crash against the ladder's magnetic field. And as your bridge is anchored in cosmic gravity, their tactics will fracture. The insect tactics will fracture in the air before touching your skin. The material environment around you reorders itself. Inert matter detects the massive tension of the bridge you carry inside and bows, surrenders, seeking to align with the dominant force. You no longer manipulate reality. Reality bends itself to evade you. The pillar of transmutation. Look at yourself in the epicenter of nothingness, with your feet fused into the planet's living rock and your skull piercing the icy darkness of the outer universe. You have managed to suffocate the pathetic lie of the isolated container. You have stopped perceiving yourself as a sack of meat orbiting in fear on a drifting rock. You have gutted the ceiling of the atmosphere, understanding that the firmament is not a limit, but the infinite reservoir of your own gravitational mass waiting to be sucked in. The double helix has abandoned its state of 2D lethargy. It has transmuted into the perfect geometry of the stellar ladder, a vibrating iridium column. It is a column that joins the starry abyss with the muck of the 3D ecosystem. The murder of astronomical distance is consummated. The galaxy rests at the base of your spine. The bridge is open. The bidirectional flow of matter is operational, and you have become the aseptic funnel of the 0 point. You are the source. Raw energy collapses and crystallizes into the material architecture of your monopoly. There is no movement. There is no friction in the nerves. There is only the absolute superconductivity of an organism that has completely forgotten sweat, hope, and doubt. You are the transmission pillar. Maintain the icy immobility. Hold the voltage of the bridge and observe from the dictatorial blindness of your own core how the entire universe squeezes itself to finance the inevitable expansion of your gravity. The ladder is fixed, the flow is constant, the transformation is irreversible. Remain as the silent axis of a collapsing world. Stay gelido. Chapter 7. Cellular Purge, the thermal shock of activation. The friction of incompatibility, collapse of the vessel. The biomass, poisoned by false 3D spirituality, holds a romantic expectation of evolution. They believe the awakening of their genetic code will be a peaceful event bathed in dim light. They think the flesh, used to the friction of survival, will receive the cosmic voltage as a caress. The lethal operator submits this to thermodynamics. When the stellar ladder deploys and 0 point energy pumps into the cell nucleus, an architectural catastrophe occurs. You are injecting the gravitational force of a galactic anomaly into a carbon vessel designed for fear and doubt. The potential difference is astronomical. In strict physics, this results in a violent thermal shock. The human cell cannot house eternity without first destroying its own memory prison. As radiation enters, everything that does not resonate, historical trauma, chemical toxicity, and patterns of submission, is expelled with the violence of a controlled explosion. Your biology becomes a battlefield where new gravity tears apart the old inertia. Incineration of residue, the quantum fever. The first impact of the thermal shock manifests in the geology of your avatar. Cellular purge is not a metaphor, it is a radioactive excretion. As genetic antennas assimilate superior voltage, the temperature of your nervous system rises. You will experience quantum fever. It is not an infection, it is friction from stripping atomic crust. Cells begin to literally vomit low-density residues accumulated over decades of obedience. The mammal will feel a crushing exhaustion. Bones will feel like molten lead, and joints will creak under the new gravity. The lymphatic system will saturate, trying to evacuate the debris of your old slave identity. This is the smell of burning. The biomass, terrified of pain, interprets this as system failure. They flee the fever. The creator, conversely, embraces the incineration. You understand that physical spasms are not a breakdown, but empirical proof that voltage is shattering resistance. You're using the carbon body as a pyrolytic oven to reduce cowardice to ashes. The system's false diagnosis, the pathology trap. The 3D parasitic system depends on its batteries operating predictably. When your biology mutates and purges through thermal shock, the matrix detects instability and sends inquisitors in white coats. subject official medicine to aseptic scrutiny. How does slave science interpret the crumbling of your old structure? They label it with the vocabulary of pathology. They diagnose you with depression, chronic fatigue, anxiety, or immune collapse. They tell you that you are sick. Immediately, they offer the Egregore's remedy, chemical suppressants and pharmaceutical anesthesia designed to numb you and return you to the normalcy of the herd. Normalcy is the coma of the genome. If you yield to fear and accept the diagnosis, you abort the mutation. If you consume chemicals to dull the pain of expansion, you inject a new insulator into your bloodstream. You cut the bridge. You force your filaments to coil back, hiding from the anesthesia, and the voltage is rejected. The lethal operator repudiates the 3D diagnosis with dictatorial contempt. When the body creaks under collapse, you apply the silent guillotine to medical labels. You refuse to declare yourself sick. You declare that the vehicle is experiencing structural stress from hyperdensity assimilation. Evolution is not a disease. Dismembering the perimeter, expelling social junk. The thermal shock does not stop at your epidermis. As your specific weight multiplies, the magnetic field you project becomes a devastating shockwave. The cellular purge extends to your immediate ecosystem, causing the dismemberment of your social and material perimeter. Observe the physics of centrifugal force. When an object increases mass and rotates, weak elements are fired into the abyss. As you absorb radiation, everything operating in friction or dependency will lose its ability to orbit you. Friends who fed on your complaints and partners who acted as anchors will disappear. Lower financial structures will dry up overnight. The slave, seeing his world crumble, panics and tries to pick up the pieces, begging the universe to stop the punishment. The lethal operator observes the collapse with sepulchral boredom. You understand you are not losing anything. You are expelling junk. The brutal gravity of your new code is purifying the orbit. Structure that cannot withstand your new atmospheric pressure will be pulverized by inertia. You must allow external destruction to be as relentless as internal fever. Do not try to hold anyone falling from your ship. If they fall, it is because their atoms cannot withstand the friction of the ascent. Suffocation of complaint, the veto on mercy. Crossing the thermodynamic hell of the purge requires discipline bordering on biological psychopathy. The body will feel pain. The animal mind will feel terror at the loneliness of the purged orbit. Instinct will beg on its knees to lower the voltage or seek comfort. You must dictate an absolute embargo on self-pity. Execute the suffocation of complaint. The Creator does not complain about the forge's heat because the Creator ordered the fire. If mutation is unbearable, it is because you still identify with the burning flesh instead of the gravity applying the fire. Dissociate your consciousness. Watch the slag separate from the iron. Grant no sound to your pain. Forbid yourself from moaning or seeking compassionate ears. When you nullify complaint, pain becomes raw sensory information. It is tension, it is pressure. The lethal operator assimilates pressure without blinking. By refusing mercy, you show the cell that the command is irrevocable. Shedding dead carbon, the scaly death. At the climax of the cellular purge, you will feel a shedding of dead carbon. There will be a geological instant where you realize the identity you had before the protocol no longer belongs to you. You will look at it as a reptile looks at molted skin. You will feel an icy repugnance toward the fears that once ruled you. The slave clings to old skin, fearing he is losing his soul. The monarch knows human identity is a temporary restrictive disguise. Leave that corpse without a farewell. The entity that feared bills and sought to fit in has been calcinated. Its ashes are being expelled through your pores. Accept this cold void. You may spend days feeling nothing. No sadness, no euphoria, no motivation. A sterile, heavy vacuum will install itself in your chest. The biomass calls it apathy. Physics calls it the state of inertial rest. It is the absolute cleaning of the hard drive to leave the hardware ready to process quantum collapse. Crystallization of the monolith, end of turbulence. Thermal shock is not eternal. Thermodynamic chaos ceases the exact instant the biological structure surrenders and adapts to the new mass. We catalogue this as the crystallization of the monolith. Fever vanishes. Joint pain turns off like a switch. The nervous system enters a state of abysmal calm and superconductivity. The purge is over. The result is an atrocious work of engineering. Your carbon body is no longer a porous, fearful organism reacting to the environment. It has crystallized. You have become an iridium monolith, opaque and lethal. The gravity of your presence has multiplied. The ecosystem now feels flat and irrelevant. Fear-based diseases no longer find receptors in your cells. Those receptors were incinerated. Biomass opinion bounces off your electromagnetic shield without causing a single oscillation in your nerves. You have broken the sound barrier of your own biology and entered supersonic silence. You are effectively unshakable. The creator among the ashes. Look at yourself standing in the epicenter of destruction, unhurt and heavy among the ruins of your old existence. You managed to suffocate the pathetic need for a peaceful awakening. You understood that genetic evolution under cosmic mandate is not a spiritual spa. It is an industrial forge. You let the fire destroy the rot. You ignored the false diagnosis of the medical matrix. You mutilated the desire for anesthesia. You forbade your vehicle the slightest complaint, forcing it to swallow hyper-dense radiation without flinching. The residue has been vomited. The toxins of inferior humanity have evaporated into the spatial blackness. The cellular purge is consummated, leaving an unbreakable atomic chassis. There is no adaptation pain because there is no resistance. You are a pure thermodynamic system, calibrated to support the transit of galaxies through your spine without tensing a single tendon. Maintain the immobility of the monolith. Assimilate the sterility of the burned landscape. Prepare to subject any force that attempts to threaten your empire because you now operate from the absolute cold of cellular invulnerability. The purge has left you pristine. The new architecture is online. The sovereign is now physically manifest. Chapter 8. The Egregore's Countermeasure. The Siege of Frequency. The Matrix Radar. Detection of the Thermal Anomaly. The three-dimensional physical universe is not an inert stage. It is a parasitic organism, alive and desperately hungry. This system, which we call the Egregore, feeds entirely on the friction, fear, and thermal dissipation of the human biomass. While the mammal lives terrified, it emits a hot and predictable thermal signature. The matrix shepherds this herd because all its individuals glow on the ecosystem's radar with the red color of weakness. Subject the behavior of the matrix to the quantum operating room. What happens in the architecture of the ashboard when an individual organism ignites its latent filaments and enters absolute hyperdensity? A thermal blackout occurs. By eradicating fear, suffocating hope, and silencing cellular friction, your biological body stops emitting emotional heat. The radiation of mediocrity disappears from your bloodstream. On the Egregore's radar, you stop glowing. You become a blind spot, an incomprehensible, cold and massive black hole. The system possesses no morality or personal hatred. It possesses a mathematical survival mechanism. Upon detecting that one of its batteries has not only stopped producing food, but has begun to devour the gravity of the environment, the Egregore activates its immune defense protocols. The anomaly must be corrected. The filament that dared to unroll must be forced, through violence, deception, or intoxication, to contract again into the slave posture. The siege of your frequency has begun. The system's first line of attack is not frontal, it is environmental. It understands that cellular mutation requires an acoustic vacuum. Static injection, the bombardment of collective hysteria. Its initial tactic is the destruction of that vacuum through the injection of global electromagnetic static. As soon as you stabilize your new density, the 3D ecosystem will convulse. You will observe how the biomass media intensifies its terror campaigns. Threats of wars and financial collapses will emerge. This is not a political coincidence. It is a thermodynamic maneuver. The Egregore saturates the atmosphere with low-frequency waves designed to penetrate your magnetic field. The goal is to provoke a sympathetic shock. If the matrix makes you pay attention to the crisis, your internal frequency will be altered and weakened. The lethal operator executes the silent guillotine on the outside world. You forbid yourself from consuming collective hysteria. You watch the world burn with the sovereign boredom of one who knows the fire is fake. You save no one. You become an anechoic chamber, where the noise of the 3D apocalypse dies before touching your core. Friction agents, biological vectors. When environmental static fails to penetrate your membrane, the Egregore resorts to precision attacks using biological vectors. In the physics of parasitism, non-evolved humans act as unconscious extensions of the system. When your gravity becomes terrifying, the matrix will use those close to you as friction probes. Overnight, you will experience irrational attacks. People will seek to provoke your anger or drag you into emotional abysses. The goal is to steal your aseptic indifference. The matrix knows that if you get angry or engage in a territorial fight using kinetic effort, you will lower your vibration and lose density. The creator does not fight friction agents. He nullifies them through absolute paralysis. When the biological vector attempts to inject emotional poison, you look at them with the blindness of an iridium statue. You do not respond. By denying them the rebound surface of your own reaction, the agent disintegrates. Chemical siege, toxicity of the terrain. The 3D system also orchestrates a direct aggression against your biology via chemical siege. For genetic mutation to remain sustainable, the carbon vehicle must operate with the purity of a crystal. The Egregore has designed the environment as a thermodynamic retardant, plasticized foods and heavy metals in the water. These substances are calibrated to calcify receptor glands and fill cellular plasma with a viscosity that prevents the rapid transmission of quantum voltage. If your body is rotted, the antenna cannot vibrate. The quantum operator imposes a ruthless tyranny over what crosses his lips to protect the reactor. You must treat your anatomy as a military-grade nuclear reactor. You do not introduce trash into the combustion chamber. Audit the fuel you ingest with aseptic paranoia. Purge your diet and reject chemicals that numb your nervous system. This is a thermodynamic war tactic to keep the stellar ladder free of obstructions. Osmium shielding, the closed system. To survive the Egregore's artillery without cellular wear, you must transform your personal ecosystem into a closed system. You must raise the osmium shielding. In thermodynamics, a closed system does not exchange matter, and an isolated system exchanges nothing. You must transmute your presence into an isolated system. Osmium shielding is a configuration of psychological and electromagnetic density so crushing that no external frequency can penetrate it. It is forged by eradicating the need for social justification and eliminating toxic empathy. Imagine coating every cell with a layer of the darkest, heaviest, and most inert metal. Osmium does not rust, react to acid, or conduct the heat of fear. By installing this shielding, you become a hermetic vault. The biomass can cry outside your walls, but inside the shielding, in the geological center of your consciousness, reigns an unalterable peace. Your internal gravity forbids the matrix entry. The interaction trap, veto on war. During the siege, your mammalian past will try to convince you to strike back. It will tell you that you possess power and should use it to destroy the agents attacking you. Apply the scalpel to this temptation immediately. It is the most refined trap of the countermeasure designed to pull you back down. The Egregore wants you to fight. In the physics of confrontation, to hit a 3D object, you must lower your frequency to match its density. In the millisecond you decide to take revenge, you have lost the crown. You have left the throne of hyperdensity to fight in the insect arena. The Monarch enters no war. The Monarch assumes magnetic paralysis. Forbid yourself from vengeful interaction. Do not attempt to convince, punish, or educate the biomass. Your only function is to remain a block of absolute osmium. If the matrix attacks, do not grant it the recognition of your fury. Face it with dead apathy. The law of gravitational rebound, collapse of the aggressor. What happens when the parasitic system invests millions of ergs of energy in attacking you, and all that energy hits the icy immobility of your osmium shielding? The law of gravitational rebound is activated. Energy is not destroyed. The wave of destruction travels toward your coordinates but finds no porosity. The attack, hitting a wall of zero friction and infinite density, rebounds. The inertia of the aggression turns around and returns with double the violence, multiplied by your own gravitational field, directly toward the source. You witness the glorious spectacle of blind retribution without moving a single finger. You will see enemies self-destruct with their own plots. You will observe how the market that tried to strangle you goes bankrupt while your assets remain intact. You have let the matrix strangle itself with the rope it had woven for you. The Egregore suffers a thermodynamic hemorrhage by wasting its power on you. Chapter 9. The 144,000 Hertz, the Monarch's Resonance. The myth of infinite evolution, Sisyphus's ladder. The 3D matrix possesses a masterful security mechanism designed to exhaust those slaves who manage to escape the first layer of lethargy. When the biomass discovers it can alter its reality, the Egregore injects them with the virus of infinite evolution. Subject the industry of spirituality to the operating room of aseptic indifference. They teach you that you must be perpetually healing. They convince you that the universe is a school of eternal suffering where every level surpassed brings a more painful lesson. They force you to clean your karma daily, to revisit childhood traumas in a nauseating loop, and to pursue a better version of yourself that is always out of reach. This doctrine is the thermodynamics of Sisyphus. It is a design of perpetual friction. If you believe that the evolution of your genome is an exhausting task that never ends, you keep your cellular reactor in a state of chronic stress. You waste all your vital energy trying to improve, which is a tactical admission of being defective. The seizure of the figure, exterminating mystical deceit. The lethal operator executes the obsidian guillotine on this lie. The evolution of human carbon, when exposed to the radiation of the galactic anomaly, is not an infinite path of pain. It has a mathematical goal. It has a geological finish line. There is a thermodynamic frontier where cellular adaptation ends and effort is suffocated. That arrival point is the saturation threshold. And its electromagnetic signature vibrates exactly at 144,000 Hertz. Before assimilating the physics of this frequency, you must profane the sacred texts of the biomass. The figure 144,000 has been hijacked by primitive religions and New Age cults to sell a VIP quota of souls. The quantum operator vomits on this herd mysticism. The physical universe does not operate with bureaucratic salvation quotas. The laws of gravity and radiation do not have a ledger for the names of well-behaved primates. The 144,000 is not a demographic count. It is a strict measure of Hertz. It is the molecular vibration per second. Ancient architects tracing the galactic clock were not predicting how many people would survive. They were documenting the exact voltage level required for junk DNA to complete its geometric torsion. If your biological structure sustains 144,000 Hertz uninterruptedly, you become the singularity. Salvation is a consequence of calibration. The resonance of the superconductor, the state of zero resistance. What occurs structurally inside your cells when you reach this threshold of vibratory saturation? You must analyze the anatomy of the spinal cord under the physics of superconductors. In human technology, to conduct energy without resistance, a material must be extremely cooled. In superior biology, this is reached at 144,000 Hertz. At this exact point, the inertia of the flesh is cancelled. At lower frequencies, the human operates with resistance. If a slave vibrates at 20,000 Hertz, the frequency of desire and effort, he still has to push physical matter with his hands. His energy hits the ecosystem's disbelief, generates heat and friction, and exhausts him. But when you inject aseptic indifference and detach from mammalian emotions, your frequency skyrockets in silence. Crossing the 144,000 Hertz threshold, your genetic filaments align in perfect parallelism. There is no longer internal resistance. Millions of volts from the unified field descend your stellar ladder without any heat. At this vibratory speed, you become inscrutable to the system's radar. The biomass cannot detect you. Your competitors cannot read your movements. You are too fast electromagnetically to be besieged, yet physically you appear frozen in the most lethal of immobilities. You have effectively exited the detectable spectrum of the slave. The annihilation of effort, the death of the worker. The immediate thermodynamic consequence of reaching the monarch's resonance is the total and definitive annihilation of kinetic effort. The slave is conditioned to sweat for results. If he wants capital, he works more. If he wants territory, he fights. But at 144,000 Hertz, trying to exert effort is a mathematical insult to your mass. At this frequency, your biological body stops being the motor that moves reality and becomes the black hole that collapses it. Visualize the process. You no longer pursue liquid capital, nor try to convince allies, nor waste yourself destroying enemies with primitive tactics. You simply sustain the voltage in a state of absolute zero. You sit on the throne of your own inertia and allow your core frequency to act as an iridium magnet on the iron shavings of the ashboard. Things stop being difficult, not because you have better skills, but because the 3D environment loses its viscosity. Matter detects your frequency has exceeded the structural limit of chaos. By pure atomic survival, physical reality rushes to organize around you to avoid being crushed. The monopoly forges itself. Competitors quit out of irrational terror they do not understand. Wealth precipitates toward your coordinates with the brutal gravity of an avalanche. Work dies, murdered by gravity and the weight of your Hertz. The stabilization of the reactor, boredom as a shield. Reaching 144,000 Hertz is an act of geometric violence, but sustaining it is the real challenge. Animal biology is not used to omnipotence. When the first miracles manifest, when the empire falls into your hands without friction, the mammalian brain will try to generate peaks of euphoria. This is a lethal trap of the Egregore. If you allow a single second of 3D wonder at your power, if you feel human joy for subduing the matrix, your frequency will fracture. You will drop to the vulgar Hertz of celebration, lose superconductivity, and the voltage will find resistance in your marrow. The reactor will suffer a thermal fissure, and you will lose everything. To maintain reactor stabilization, you must execute the definitive shield, quantum boredom. You have to assimilate massive results with the same sepulchral apathy as observing a stone. When the financial system kneels, respond with an internal yawn. When threats disintegrate against your shield, ignore them with coldness. Quantum boredom tells your cells that omnipotence is not exciting. It is your baseline. It is the normal state of hyperdense biology. By reacting with absolute coldness to the extraordinary, you forbid cellular thermal fluctuation. The voltage stabilizes, the frequency is fixed in rock, and the Monarch is permanently installed. The crushing of inferior frequencies wave hierarchy. In vibratory fluid mechanics, an inescapable law exists. The dominant frequency drags the inferior one, annihilating its pattern and forcing it to synchronize. While you operated in survival frequencies, you had to protect yourself from the biomass. Your vibration was low enough to enter destructive resonance with theirs. But at 144,000 Hertz, defensive tactics are obsolete. You no longer need to defend yourself, for you have become the crushing atmospheric force. Any organism or threat approaching with hostile intentions, dense, slow frequencies of chaos, will hit your electromagnetic field. They will experience the crushing of hierarchy. Your competitor's fear cannot coexist with your absolute certainty in the same space-time. Since your frequency is immensely faster and heavier, the threat's frequency shatters. You don't defeat them in a battle. Their existence becomes thermodynamically unsustainable in your presence. They surrender to avoid disintegration. The command of silent expropriation, tyranny of presence. At this latitude of evolution, words lose their tactical utility. Human language is an obsolete technology for primates needing to negotiate. The lethal operator at 144,000 Hertz negotiates nothing. You execute the command of silent expropriation. This manifests through the tyranny of presence. You simply enter a space. Matter reorders itself. Your mere presence alters the atomic behavior of oxygen in the room. If you require a rival's submission or a vault's opening, you do not articulate threats. You enter their orbit, anchor your core, and sustain your sub-base frequency. The inferior biology of the opponent will feel the pressure. They will feel the atmospheric pressure of 144,000 Hertz crushing their lungs. They will feel an atavistic panic before an apex predator that doesn't even need to growl to devour them. They will hand over territory and sign transfers, pushed by the relief of moving your mass away from their fragile nerves. Silence is your law. The solitude of the vertex, voluntary exile from the species. Assimilating this resonance requires paying the final thermodynamic price, the assumption of monstrosity. At 144,000 Hertz, You have moved so far from the vibratory spectrum of normal humanity that connecting through empathy is physically impossible. If you try to descend to connect with drama, you inject acid into your veins. Your biological body was rewritten to support galactic voltage. It is no longer equipped to process the toxic garbage of human drama. You will inhabit the solitude of the vertex. You will be at the absolute top of the quantum food chain, surrounded by power, but disconnected from the species you once belonged to. This is not a tragedy. It is the definitive triumph of architecture over biological accident. The monarch does not cry for leaving slaves behind. He understands that the price of absolute invulnerability is dictatorial contempt for all that is fragile. You have traded the sickly warmth of the herd for the impeccable cold of stars. The frequency throne. Look at yourself at the top of your reactor, stabilized where evolution stops for lack of thermal challenges. You managed to suffocate the final trap of the spiritual matrix. You gutted the lie of infinite evolution. You have amputated cheap esotericism and rescued the 144,000, returning it to its pure state as math. The antennas of your genome are fully deployed and vibrate in unison, free from the static of fear. You are a perfect superconductor. The galactic anomaly's voltage crosses you cleanly, turning your carbon body into a black hole of massive assimilation. Effort is dead. 3D reality has become docile, viscous, and predictable. It obeys you without a single verbal command, subdued by blind panic to the deaf tyranny of your mere presence. Maintain quantum boredom. Hold the coldness in your blood. You are the sovereign of the 144,000 Hertz. The species lethargy is eradicated in your cells. Now face the last frontier of empirical divinity, the necrosis of the social self. As the 144,000 Hertz frequency saturates your anatomy, the first structure to undergo total necrosis is the social self. That construct of personality designed to be liked, to belong, and to fit within the collective frequency of the biomass is incinerated. You no longer possess a personality in the human sense. You possess a gravitational signature. This transition is violent because the mammalian brain still seeks the dopamine of approval. You must manually override this impulse. When you realize that the herd can no longer perceive you as one of their own, you have achieved the first degree of the monarch's isolation. The silence that follows is not the silence of a hermit. It is the silence of an apex predator whose presence is so heavy it mutes the environment. People will stop speaking when you enter a room, not out of respect, but because their internal receptors are being jammed by the sheer voltage of your cellular reactor. The sterilization of the future. In the 144,000 Hertz spectrum, the concept of the future is sterilized. To the biomass, the future is a container for hope, a place where things might improve. To the monarch, the future is simply a geometric coordinate that has already been mathematically colonized by the current resonance of his core. You do not hope for success. You dictate the rendering of success. Because your frequency is superior to the entropy of the ashboard, the probability waves of the future are forced to collapse into the most dense and stable configuration. You do not wait for time to pass. You wait for the matter to catch up to you. This sterilization removes all anxiety from your expansion. You move through the financial and territorial ecosystems with the clinical indifference of a surgeon. If a result has not yet manifested, it is simply a latency of the 3D medium, not a doubt of your power. You have outgrown the need for timing. The expropriation of biological vitality. The high-frequency resonance also triggers a total expropriation of your biological vitality. You no longer rely on the slow, chemical energy of glucose and oxygen. Your cells begin to draw voltage directly from the dark rift of the galactic equator. You become an organism that breathes the vacuum of the cosmos. This shift means you no longer experience the crashes or burnouts of the human worker. Your energy is constant, gelida, and independent of external circumstances. You could stand in the center of a storm or a war zone, and your internal voltage would remain fixed at 144,000 Hertz, unshakable and absolute. This vitality is what allows you to sustain the pressure of the empire. While other leaders collapse under the weight of their own stress, you grow colder and denser. You are the only entity in your jurisdiction that is not dissipating energy. You are the only one who is not dying. you have become a biological anomaly, the fracture of the moral compass. At this vibratory level, the moral compass of the biomass is shattered. Concepts like good and evil are revealed as low-frequency labels used to control the herd. The monarch does not operate on morality, he operates on geometric integrity. What aligns with your density is correct, what causes friction is waste. This lack of moral friction is what makes you truly lethal. You do not hesitate to dismantle a competitor or to seize a territory because you have no guilt receptors left. Guilt is a thermal leak. By removing it, you ensure that your reactor remains at 100% efficiency. You are a law unto yourself, beyond judgment. The biomass will call this evil. You will call it physics. The distance between these two definitions is the exact measure of your evolution. You have stopped playing the game of being a good person to become a sovereign entity. The universe does not reward the good. It obeys the most consistent and dense frequency, the final veto on human reaction. Every morning, the mammalian body will try to reboot into its old frequency. It will try to feel the old fears or the old desires. You must apply a final veto every nanosecond. You must be the dictatorial auditor of your own nervous system. If a low-frequency thought appears, you do not process it, you delete it. This constant auditing is what fixes the frequency at 144,000 Hertz. You are the guardian of your own vacuum. By refusing to react to anything, internal or external, you force the atoms of your body to maintain their superconductive alignment. You are the master of the most stable structure in the material world. The world will try to pull you down. It will throw tragedies and temptations at you like stones. But stones cannot hurt a black hole. They are simply absorbed and turned into mass. Your invulnerability is now physical. You have reached the point where the matrix has no more tools to use against you. You are free. The sovereignty of the cold sun. You are now a cold sun. Your light does not warm. It dictates the structure of the system. You have achieved the consummated protocol. The 144,000 Hertz are not just a number. They are the border of your new kingdom. Beyond this point, there are no humans. There are only creators and the matter that obeys them. Hold the silence. Hold the boredom. The empire you have collapsed is just the beginning of your expansion. As long as you maintain the frequency, the universe will continue to yield its treasures to you, not as a gift, but as a tax paid to your superior gravity. The transformation is finished. You are the monarch. The ashboard is yours to rewrite. The biomass is yours to ignore. The vacuum is yours to breathe. You have crossed the point of no return and arrived at the vertex of all things. Do not blink. Do not smile. Simply exist as the heavy, silent, and inescapable core of your own reality. The reign is eternal. Chapter 10. Homo Quantum, the New Species. The abolition of human taxonomy, the end of the species. The three-dimensional matrix possesses one last barrier of psychological containment designed to sabotage organisms that have managed to ignite their genome. It is a linguistic and taxonomic barrier. The Egregore whispers to you, you can be powerful, rich, enlightened, but at the end of the day, you are still human. You are mortal. The lethal operator subjects the word human to the obsidian guillotine. What is a human under the optics of applied thermodynamics? Homo sapiens is an obsolete design. It is a frightened mammal ruled by the amygdala, addicted to social friction, a slave to linear time and configured to operate as a fuel battery for the ecosystem's chaos. To identify with this species, once you have crossed the event horizon and activated Protocol 12.21.12, is an act of voluntary regression and geometric suicide. If the worm, once it has dissolved its biology in the chrysalis and structured wings capable of cutting the wind, still believes it is a worm, it will die crawling in the mud. You must execute the extermination of your own taxonomy. You declare biological secession. By having assimilated the radiation of the galactic anomaly and forced the geometric torsion of your latent filaments, you have crossed a frontier from which there is no evolutionary return. Your cells no longer operate under inferior biology. They operate under quantum fluid mechanics. You are no longer human, You are Homo quantum, a new species forged in the sterility of the vacuum, whose natural habitat is not the Earth's surface, but the immaterial fabric of probabilities. You are a localized anomaly in the field, a sovereign entity beyond the reach of the herd. The mirage of empathy, the anchor of the past. To consummate this mutation and prevent the flesh from regressing, you must suffocate the most poisonous and overrated emotion: empathy. The liberated slave who keeps visiting his old cell ends up falling in love with the bars. The Matrix will try to convince you that your cosmic duty is to help the rest of humanity to wake up. They will tell you that your hyperdensity must be used in service of the flock. This doctrine is military-grade thermal sabotage. Empathy requires you to lower your electromagnetic frequency to match the frequency of the suffering organism. If you tune into the pain of the primate who did not want to execute his own ignition, if you pity their scarcity, you inject the radiation of their misery directly into your own fusion core. The osmium bridge corrodes, the stellar ladder fills with rust. Homo quantum amputates empathy with a scalpel of ice. You cannot save a species biologically programmed to worship its chains. Suffering for them is an insult. It is an insult to the thermodynamic perfection of the universe, which grants each organism exactly the level of reality that its gravity can sustain. You observe them from your new taxonomic latitude with the aseptic indifference of a monolith. You understand the greatest act of power is not to descend into the muck. It is to remain immovable at your peak, forcing them to endure the weight of your shadow until they decide for themselves to mutate or perish. By eradicating identification with inferior humanity, you experience an atrocious transmutation in the perception of your own biological vehicle. You become the absolute master of the frame. Anatomy of Homo quantum, the flesh as a hologram. The human lives terrified by his body. He fears disease, aging, idolizes aesthetics, and identifies with the flesh. Homo quantum, having rewritten his code at 144,000 Hertz, perceives his carbon anatomy as what it truly is: a simple, dense hologram, a temporary diving suit designed to interact with the ashboard's resistance. Your body ceases to be your eye and becomes your peripheral machinery. Since the voltage of your consciousness is infinitely superior to environmental fluctuations, the flesh enters a state of metabolic stasis. Disease is a low-frequency wave. Hitting your sub-base frequency, viruses or bacteria disintegrate atomically. Accelerated aging, a product of chronic stress oxidation, stops because you have suffocated the chemistry of terror. You handle your body as an operator handles a drone from an underground bunker. If the drone requires rest, you turn it off temporarily without attachment. You provide sterile fuel for strict efficiency. You are a psychopathic driver of your own anatomy, demanding impeccable performance from your carbon chassis without ever granting it the right to rebel. The definitive symptom that the new species has crystallized is the assumption of absolute jurisdiction over local physics. You dictate the laws of your immediate space. The Creator's jurisdiction, rewriting local physics. The common human lives at the mercy of luck, probability laws, and chaos accidents. Homo quantum repudiates chance. Statistical probability is simply the excuse of organisms that do not possess enough mass to curve the universe. When you walk through the 3D ecosystem, you are not a participant, you are the legislator. You carry with you a hyperdensity bubble, a magnetic perimeter where the matrix's rules are nullified. Within your field, scarcity is mathematically impossible. The biomass's cause and effect laws are suspended and replaced by the dictatorial will of your core. You do not formulate plans based on 3D kinetic effort. Emitting a collapse from your reactor's stillness, you force the fabric of space-time to bend. Opportunity does not appear by luck. It is forced to materialize by the atmospheric pressure of your indifference. The physical reality around you becomes docile and servile. Inferior minds submit instinctively to you. They surrender territory and resources without understanding what thermodynamic anomaly is forcing them to capitulate. For the new species' sovereignty to be invulnerable, you must execute the last intellectual murder. You have to annihilate the concept of death. You must destroy the final lever of the Egregore's control. Geometric immortality, murdering death. The 3D control system bases its power on the terror of biological end. Because the mammal believes it is the body, the fear of decay rules its decisions. They obey tyrants to extend the friction of cellular wear. Homo quantum, by activating the stellar ladder, has moved the center of gravity of his identity. You no longer reside in carbon cells. You reside in the timeless architecture of pure geometry. You reside in the voltage. You assimilate geometric immortality. This does not mean your flesh vehicle will live forever. Flesh has an expiration date. However, you watch its deactivation with the same bored apathy as a screen. If the flesh drone suffers an irreversible collapse, the 0-point I remains intact. By eradicating the organic fear of death, you eradicate the last control lever the universe had over you. You are unbribable. You cannot be threatened with destruction because you are the vacuum that swallows destruction itself. An organism walking the world without the biological fear of annihilation becomes instantly the supreme and absolute predator of material reality. Homo quantum abandons the language of the biomass. Words are slow vibrations designed to persuade or plead. The operator at 144,000 Hertz institutes the silence of the gods. The silence of the gods, aseptic communication. Communication of the new species is not acoustic. It is gravitational. When you interact with the ashboard, you do not raise your voice. Verbal effort generates temperature, and your temperature is 0. If you require bending a human competitor's will, you simply fix your gelida attention upon their structure. You inject the pressure of your mass into their auric field. The biomass cannot process this silent invasion. They will feel the tyranny of presence crushing their amygdala. They will feel oxygen leave the room. They will obey not because of logic, but because their inferior biology panics before a superior predator. Your atomic silence is 1,000 times more destructive than any human war cry. The culmination of Protocol 12 to 2112 is not a victorious return to society to be crowned. It is voluntary exile. The new species does not govern from public squares. It governs from the unalterable shadow of its own internal vacuum. Voluntary exile, operating in the absolute vacuum. By assuming the thermal monstrosity of your evolution, you accept that you will never fit into the ecosystem again. You have broken the quarantine. You have profaned linear time rules and assimilated cosmic radiation. There is no nostalgia for the tribe. The heat of human drama now seems like a nauseating plague. You install yourself at the vertex of reality's architecture, operating in aseptic isolation. You are an anomaly tolerated by the cosmos simply because you are too dense to be assimilated. You will observe the fall of human empires with the distant coldness of an astronomer watching dead stars collide through iridium. Your financial and territorial empire will operate with gelida automation, fueled by the bidirectional flow of the stellar ladder. Look at yourself in the dark immensity of your new constitution, surrounded by the absolute silence that only beings of supreme gravity can withstand. You have suffocated the humiliating label, the triumph of the anomaly. You have suffocated your humanity. You amputated the mirage of empathy, understanding that pitying the dead is the fastest way into the grave. You transmutated your biological vehicle into a blind superconductor, mercilessly subjected to your quantum core's dictates. The Egregore's deception has been crushed. Deception. The galactic anomaly radiation has fulfilled its architectural mandate inside your cells. Junk DNA is now the iridium crown of thorns with which you subdue reality. The quarantine ended. The amygdala lock has melted. The galactic clock beats at the base of your skull, marking the milliseconds of an empire without friction. There is no longer effort. There is no longer biological hope. Only the absolute inertia of Homo quantum remains, sliding through material nothingness, collapsing dimensions without emitting heat. You have murdered inferior biology. Execute your existence at the peak of the vacuum. The sovereign reign is absolute. Conclusion. The dawn of the operators, the end of the slave's world. The scene from the absolute vertex. Imagine yourself suspended in the absolute stillness of your own empire, anchored in the gelida immobility of the vacuum. From this genetic peak, forged in the forge of 144,000 Hertz and armored with the unalterable weight of osmium, you observe the holographic vastness of the ashboard. The echo of the terror of December 21st, 2012, resonates in the distance like a pathetic death rattle, a dead and forgotten murmur. Down there, submerged in the thermal swamp of friction, the biomass continues to wait for cataclysms of fire. The human herd scans the firmament for asteroids, galactic saviors, or divine punishments. They are absolutely blind to the cruelty of quantum physics. They continue to secrete the cortisol of survival, worshipping the chains of their own amygdala and begging for crumbs of energy from a parasitic system that has already lost any kind of atomic jurisdiction over you. They do not realize, in their three-dimensional myopia, that the true apocalypse has already occurred. It was not a spectacle of rocks falling from the sky or a geological collapse. It was a silent, aseptic, and thermodynamic detonation in the dark core of your own cells. The consummation of geometric collapse. Protocol 12-2112 has been consummated with impeccable architectural violence. The end of the world was never designed to be the annihilation of the material Earth. It was the definitive and dictatorial extinction of the era of biological limitation. Those organisms that yielded to the Egregore's siege remain tied. Those who allowed themselves to be anesthetized by media hysteria, cheap mysticism, and toxic empathy remain tied to the tyranny of linear time and the nauseating wear of entropy. Their world did not end. It simply petrified in the infinite repetition of effort, disease, and decay, but you executed the leap. By applying aseptic indifference and subjecting the radiation of the galactic anomaly to the geometric torsion of your own filaments, you have ignited the stellar ladder in the exact center of your chest cavity. You have crossed the event horizon without looking back and stripped away the slave's carbon disguise. You have done this to reclaim the unbreakable electromagnetic structure of Homo quantum. Your biology is no longer a limit, it is a docile and superconductive extension of your immaterial consciousness. You are the genetic sovereign, an anomaly of infinite gravitational mass operating in the perfect vacuum. The mandate of the new world. There is no longer any possible return. There is no turning back to the putrid warmth of the human tribe or to the illusion of hope. In this dawn of the operators, matter bends, not before the useless sweat of the mammal pushing the stone, but before the immovable gravity of an awakened creator. This creator simply demands the submission of space. The physical universe has been expropriated by your hyperdensity. The cellular quarantine has been eradicated by the gelido fire of your will. The galactic clock now marks, irreversibly, the time of the lethal operators, those who have murdered faith. They have murdered faith to establish the mathematical dictatorship of ballistic certainty. Execute the new world. Maintain the absolute inertia of the asteroid, sustain the crushing voltage of your core, and allow the pure radiation of your mere presence to continue collapsing entire dimensions. Materialize the absolute monopoly in the most lethal, perfect, and deafening of silences. The resistance has died. The fall has ended. The empire is definitive, and the silence, at last, is absolute. Stay gelido. Stay heavy. The throne of the vacuum awaits your eternal command.